Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. In this video, a ridiculous HOA Karen called the police on a farmer claiming his farm property violates federal law. Let's find out what happened. So just for a bit of background, I got sick of the city a few years ago. I was already in my 30s and after spending quite a few years serving, I thought a change of pace was in order. On a whim more than anything else, I decided to move out to the countryside and try my hand at farming on a property I inherited from a great aunt. I halfway expected to get tired of it and head back to the city sooner or later, but to my surprise I ended up really enjoying the work, especially compared to the soulless stuff I was doing before. In particular, I found a passion for micro-farming. It really gave me a sense of peace and purpose that I'd been unable to find anywhere else, and it's become something that I want to protect at all costs. Now, it's also important to understand that the land is actually right on the border between a sprawling suburb and true farming land. On one side, you've got a strict, regimented HOA community that gets really picky about their regulations, and on the other side, you have a vast patchwork of big and small farms. I am firmly outside the HOA, but it really is just a stone's throw away. More importantly, I actually share a water access point with the neighborhood utility, which is where our problems begin. In particular, it was early summer when tensions really escalated in a way that I was not expecting. All at once, the HOA got furious at me and started to apply all sorts of pressure, both legal and otherwise. Initially, I had no idea where their vitriol came from, so I was completely in the dark. However, I had already grown far too attached to my land and way of life to just roll over and let them have their way. I knew that I would have to stand up for my rights and figure out why all these disputes were suddenly popping up. Alright, maybe it was a bit of an exaggeration to say I had no idea whatsoever where these problems were coming from, and there was one particular member of the HOA that I had butted heads with before, though it had just been over minor stuff in the past. She would send me notices and complain that I was violating some rule or other, and each time I had to remind her that I was not actually a member of the HOA. Back then I thought that she was just a bit overzealous in executing her duties, but as time went on I understood that things were a little more complicated than that. Specifically, she had appointed herself as compliance enforcer of the HOA. If you think that sounds like a pain and probably a sign that someone is a little too full of themselves, then you are exactly right. Even though she was not the president of the HOA, she wielded a lot of informal power purely by virtue of being so stubborn and annoying that everyone else eventually yielded and went along with what she wanted because it was too much of a hassle to actually stand up to her. That is the impression I got, at least. And that all brings us to the specific issues that Karen was raising. In her words, my farm was cheapening the neighborhood and bringing down property values. She kept trying to convince me that I had a duty to the HOA regardless of whether I was a member, because my property was so close. To say that I was not persuaded by that argument would be an understatement, mainly because I thought my property actually looked pretty good. It was tidy and well kept, so I think she was just angry that it didn't fit into the exact copy-paste mold of all the homes next door. But then again, part of me thinks that even if I had caved into all her demands, then she would have found entirely new complaints so she could prove her superiority all over again. Just having her typical suburban fantasy was not enough for that woman though. No, she needed to make sure that everyone was also subscribing to her vision of utopia. Or I guess in this case, suburbia. So it wouldn't have been enough if people did the same things of their own accord. Anyway, after we'd been going back and forth for a few months with mostly polite exchanges, things suddenly took a turn for the ugly. Without warning, the police showed up to investigate my property, and they seemed just as confused as me. After a short talk while I showed them around the place, they admitted that they'd been called out here because someone had reported illegal dumping on a public waterway. It didn't take long for me to put two and two together. I didn't know if Karen had just mistaken what I was doing or if she was just outright lying, but she was trying to tell people that I was dumping fertilizer straight into the water access point that I shared with the HOA. Needless to say, the officers didn't find anything amiss and they apologized for wasting my time. Foolishly, I thought that might be the end of things. Over the next few weeks, I received increasingly stern warnings from the HOA that I needed to stop all farming operations until further notice. When I asked what the hell that meant, They just sent the same warning over and over again. I got the distinct impression that Karen was behind this, but the notices were definitely official, or at least as far as HOA communication